Alright, so what's your name? Where you from?
My name is Jadie Meprivert, and I'm from the Dominican Republic.
And what part are you from?
I'm from Santo Domingo, but my family is from El Cibao. My father's side of the family is from Haiti.
Okay. How would you describe Santo Domingo for somebody that, like me that's never been there?
Santo Domingo is beautiful, beautiful. It's I think it's very tropical. It's hot all the time. It's very, very hot all the time, except for perhaps like in the night. It tends to, I think, compare to some of the New York City weather. But growing up over there was like a dream in and of itself. I had a good childhood there. And I think the city and the rural parts, like let's say El Campo, they're very different. A lot of tourists only come for the beaches and for the resorts and things like that. But I think that the heart of DR, it's in the people. You know, of itself, you go over there and there's always someone saying, God bless you. There's always someone saying, que Dios te bendiga. There's always someone who's offering you food, even if you're full. Even if you're full, I think that that's one of the things that we're very accommodating people. We're hilarious. I'd say we're very funny. But it's just like the nature as well with the city and the humility that you can find in there, regardless of the poverty. I think that's beautiful.
Now, the area you grew up in, was it more like a rural area, like a suburb, or was it more like a city?
We lived right in front of the sea. We lived near what we call a malecón, which is kind of like a boardwalk, or right next to the sea, pretty much the coast of the sea. And so it was in between in of itself. It was the city, but because we lived so right next to the sea, and also let's say like an hour away from El Campo or the rural part, I got to experience the best of both worlds.
So kind of like a beach town, like Venice Beach or Long Beach in Long Island. Mm-hmm. Okay. So growing up as a kid, like, were you into art? Like, what was your upbringing like? Was when you hear about what we call a third world country, or the countries that are not like the United States, we think about a lot of violence and things like that happening. And when you hear about tourism, you know, that has something else that it brings with it. What was the environment like for you? What kind of things were going on in your neighborhood? Was it peaceful? Was it kind of turbulent? How would you describe that?
I'd say that even though I can practically look back and say that I had an amazing childhood, there was a lot going on behind the scenes that a lot of people don't visibly point out or see at first when they meet me. For example, I experienced a lot of domestic violence at home. My father was a drug dealer, and so he was, he was kicked out of the country for drug trafficking. And so growing up, I would see a lot of guns. I would see him getting arrested all the time. And we would receive calls from him in jail, you know, and arguably, I didn't know at the time that my father had to do the things that he had to do in order to provide for us. And so we lived in an amazing house, and there was nothing that we missed. We didn't miss food. We didn't miss clothes. We didn't miss these things that one would understand would happen in a third world country. And I didn't know where the money was coming from. And so even though I had food on the table and I had heat at home and light, which would go off, and we would lose like an entire block, and our house would stay lit. And so when I found out that my father was arrested for drug possession, you know, it was growing up. It was crazy. It was crazy. It was a lot of it caused a lot of like growing up. I didn't know what to identify with. I didn't know like my father wasn't around, but I loved my father for the times that he wasn't, because he always taught us great things. And I understood that as a black man, he didn't have any other option. He was forced with 2 children to feed, and knowing that he didn't have the proper education, I knew that he was forced, and I knew that he had no other option. And so I made peace with that and I forgave him. But that kind of shaped everything else for me as we came to this country, and I understood that I had to work harder and I had to run further than what my parents and what my dad had sacrificed his life for.
That's deep. I didn't know that about you. The only thing I asked is to speak up a little bit more because you got a very interesting story.
Thank you.
So, I mean, I've heard that from a lot of people in other countries, even in this country. The people who typically migrate to another country, they end up having to commit crimes just basically to get by. Do you think that was there any stigma about your father in the community being that he was Haitian, or were there a lot of Haitian people in your community in general?
So being an Afro-Latina, say for me, is very important to me because growing up I didn't used to identify with my Haitian side, because being that I come from DR, there's a lot of political and racial unrest where I come from, especially with Haitians versus Dominican, a lot of colorism, a lot of racism where I come from. And so I saw a lot of that growing up, whereas, I grew up with a lot of aunts and uncles and family members that were all of all colors, of all shades, dark as black, Haitian black, anything, African black, there were so many shades that I grew up in, but there was still racism at home, where we would talk about certain races or even Haitians in such a derogatory way. You wouldn't want to hang out with them. You wouldn't want to offer them a table. You would think that they were thieves or whatever. And so growing up, I heard a lot of that language circulating at home and circulating at the table, whereas we were mixed and we were half Haitian. And so it created, for me, was very rough growing up because I couldn't wear my hair like this. I couldn't go outside. I would refrain from telling people that my last name was Haitian, and instead I would say that I was French. And so it wasn't until I came here, until I learned some of my history, until I went to college, that I was able to get educated and woke up.
Yeah. All right, so can you bring me to the point, one thing, did you think about coming to the U.S. as a kid, or was it a dream, or did you not think about it?
So I came here when I was 10 years old. My mom and my dad separated when we were 5. My mom had to run away to the States in fear of all the violence, domestic violence that she had been facing at the time. And so she came here alone. And after a while, we were raised only by my uncle, my aunt, my stepmother, and my family. We were without a father, without a mother, and so my mom took us here, and she brought us here so that we could have a better life.
So when you say we, how many siblings do you have?
Me and my brother. So it's very young. It's me and my brother.
Oh, okay, cool. So when you got here, was there anything like what did you notice that was different about the U.S. versus being in DR?
So I would say I struggled a lot when I came here because it was learning a different rope, learning a whole new language, and assimilating to a culture that was very different from the one I grew up in. I grew up in a cul-de-sac. In a type, it was a city, but it was kind of like all these houses centered, and we were right there at the end of the cul-de-sac. So we got to see all these houses, the sea right behind us, and so we knew all the families. We played with all those kids, and we went to school with them. Whereas when I came here, there was one neighborhood, an entire city that I was unfamiliar with.
Well, where did you land when you guys came here?
I came here. When we first came here, we lived in the Heights.
Okay.
So 191st, right at the crown of Dominican land, right at the crown of Latino land, basically.
For sure.
And so it was right there where I felt most at home. And it was, for me, I thank God that my mom lived there and that we started living there when we first came here, because it made me feel that, even though I was far away from home, I didn't have to go too far to reconnect to my roots. And even though New York City was initially hard to navigate in, it was never short of love.
Okay. Was this growing up? Was there anybody who encouraged you to do art? Like, what were you into as a kid? Was it?
So I was, as a kid, it was
Talking
always a
about,
lot of.
like elementary school, like from DR, and then when you first came here. Were you
So
into art?
I think for me, I grew up in a family that was very like artistically oriented. A lot of my brother. It was definitely my brother. A lot of my older brother. So my only brother, he's 3 years older than I am, and he had always been drawing during his childhood. Him and a cousin of ours. They've always been drawing, always had been illustrating, and so they always put me on. My brother would always buy me all these like anime books and would always bring me to the library to read like comics and all kinds of things. And so he would put me on to like new anime. He would put me on to like certain artists and certain things. And so he introduced me to this culture that I never knew anything about. And so that was what he liked, and because like arguably I would follow my brother anywhere and I would do anything that he was doing. I felt so interested because I looked up to him, and I still do. And so he introduced me to art.
I heard that you thought that anime characters were Dominican. Can you talk about that?
So, oh my gosh. So funny story is that growing up, I thought anime characters were Dominican. Because I had no concept of race. I had no concept of like differentiation between people at the time. And I just thought like whenever I saw Speed Racer, I'm like, yo, that's one of mine. That's one of mine right there. Like, I know this guy. That could be anyone in the island. And I thought Goku, basically, or Vegeta was Dominican, but I didn't have a it sounds crazy. It sounds crazy now, but to a kid, your kids have no concept of time, age. I had a kid ask me like, "Oh, how old are you?" And I said, "Oh, 26." And it's like, "Are you still in school?" I'm like, "Yeah." It's like, "How? Why?" I'm like, "What?" It's like, "You're an adult." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And so definitely, I lied to this kid once, and I told them I was 7 years old. And they totally believed it, and they were like, "Yes, okay, that's cool." And thinking about that innocence, I think back, like, I really thought that we were all one people. And we really are. But just like seeing anime, seeing all these TV shows with all these different people, different persona, I didn't really think twice about where they came from, where they were born. It didn't really matter to me. I loved watching the things that I saw.
So moving forward, you studied art in college, right?
Yes.
So can you talk about that? Like, what college you went to, and
It's crazy. You're gonna love this story. So I went to Lehman College. In the Bronx. I went to Lehman College in the Bronx. And I started there pursuing a career in teaching. And I was pursuing an English major, an English literature major. So I was not an artist at all. I think that I lost a lot of the fire for my dream that I had in high school when I went through like depression. I went through a lot of like relationship breaks and things like that. And so when I started college, I was very put off by this fear of financial instability. And these voices that would always speak to me, like whether it was family or friends, like, are you sure you're gonna get money from that? How are you going to feed your family? How are you going to make money? And so I decided to go into teaching and to leave art behind and go into English instead. And undeniably, I loved English. I loved literature. I just wanted to teach. That's all I wanted. I knew that I wanted to do. I wanted to teach because I wanted to be around children. I wanted to be around the youth. And to be able,
children?
I love kids.
I guess.
Yes, it's over. Hire me. I love kids. I love teaching. Yes, I love her. Are you kidding me? Any day, just let me know. Oh my gosh. And so like I knew that I wanted to be around kids. I wanted to be around youth, high school, elementary. I just wanted to teach because I felt that that's how we change the world, really, with kids, starting with kids first, making sure that they have a good experience of life and the world so that they, when they grow up, they can look back and do the same for others, right? And kind of get this chain going. And so I remember 4 years into my education, I'm about to graduate, I'm 21 years old, and I don't know what happened, but I started drawing again. And I just heard a voice just asking me, my own voice asking myself, 60 years from now, will you be happy with what you've made? Will you be happy at your office? And I just remember dropping all of my classes, walking into this class with the head of the department and walking right back out. And I quit everything. I quit my major. I left everything. I remember her saying, you can't do this. You can't quit. You're about to graduate. You're in English honors. All these teachers recommended you. And I said, do this. But basically, I said, thank you, but I can't. I have to follow my dream. And so my first love was art. And so that very year, I signed up for art classes. And that very year, I signed up for 4 more years of my life in the art department. And that was one of the best decisions I ever made. That and following Jesus. So it was amazing. It opened so many doors for me. I ended up in galleries that I never thought I would be in. I met family there, and it changed my life.
Okay, so you start art, and then you said also following Jesus. Was that when you got into religion as well?
So it wasn't until, let's say, my last year of college, I would say. That's when I was not cemented. It wasn't until like my last year of college when I would say,
Well, what were you doing? Most people they go through something real turbulent and they're like, I'm gonna go to the church. Crazy.
So I was going through something turbulent.
Okay.
I was going through something turbulent. So I grew up Catholic, and so I didn't really quite have a relationship with God in and of itself. My brother and I were kind of in and out of church. We would go to church, but let's say we would go to the last 5 minutes of mass, where people are giving peace to you, peace to me. They're kind of hugging. So we would never really sit on a service or long enough to even hear a word of God. And so my brother just quit altogether. And because I love my brother and I kind of went everywhere that he was going, I quit with him. And so it was just me going on through life by myself, kind of figuring things out. I was in a 7-year relationship at the time during the end of high school and then all through college. And it wasn't until the very last year when I got through a breakup, where I suffered a breakup, it kind of zoned in on me, like, what am I going to do with my life? I spent so many years of my life through this relationship and catering to this person and preparing myself to be, quote unquote, a modeled wife, and just like pouring out into this relationship everything that I had, that I didn't know who I was. I had no identity. I didn't know what I liked other than being with that person. And I didn't even know what my taste in music was. I didn't know. I didn't know if I liked football because I watched it with this person. I didn't know if I liked the Giants because I liked the Giants. And so after this breakup, I almost didn't want to live. I almost didn't want to go on. There was marriage talk. This person was going to propose. And leaving that behind, it messed with my mind, it messed with my heart. And so God came to me when I needed it the most. One of my sisters, who I had met 5 years prior to everything, when I first entered Lehman College, she hit me up and she kept in touch with me. And I remember one night I just hit her up and I said, can I go to your church? Because it popped up on my Instagram and I saw service through her Instagram, and I said to myself, this looks like such a happy place. This looks like such an amazing place. I just need to go. And so when I hit her up, she's like, yes, what? Come through. And I came the very next Sunday. And ever since then, I stayed here.